Hello and welcome to History Bubble Argentina Part 5. This will be the last part and I'll cover the rest of Argentina's history since the 1973 May election. So as I said last time, Argentina had been run by different military dictators for almost 7 years, but they were now holding an election, and the two major parties, the Radicals and the Justicialists, are both participating. And in the end, the Peronists win with over double the votes over the Radicals. But other minor parties also got a lot of votes, so they possess no majority. The new president started his new term by releasing all imprisoned for rebelling against the military dictators. They also improved their relations with Cuba and gave them aid during the blockade from the USA. Far left and right Peronist groups started forming, creating strike and minor conflicts around the country, especially against each other. But Cámpora, the president, was also soon shown to be on the left side of Peronism and soon ended the conflict. Perón himself also wanted to get back to Argentina after being in exile since his last presidency 18 years ago. As he returned, masses of Peronists gathered to see his return. But as he did, extremist right-wing Peronists had camouflaged themselves and were holding snipers and started firing at the masses. This is what's now called the Cieza massacre, and 13 people lost their life to it and over 300 were injured. This even furthered the split between the left and right wing, and Cámpora was on the left started losing influence. After these incidents, Cámpora resigned and a new election was to be staged with intent from Cámpora to put Perón in power. He would probably have done this anyway, but the massacre expanded his reason to do so. Perón won, and with a majority this time. The far-left Peronists also created an organization called the Montoneros, who were partly at fault for the strikes and fighting happening during Cámpora's presidency. Perón did not have the same opinion of these far-left Peronists and tried to remove them from positions of power. Perón also introduced many new labor laws and social welfare programs, and the economy of Argentina was bettering once again. But a few major things started hindering the improvement, such as the oil embargo from Arab countries making oil prices skyrocket, and disease spreading from Argentine meat, making a lot of countries stop importing one of Argentina's main exports. In the opposition to the far-left Montoneros, one of Perón's ministers formed the AAA, or Anti-Communist Argentine Alliance, far-right movement, killing members of the Montoneros, but later also peaceful left-wing opposition. Perón was mostly taking the side of the right wing, not doing anything about them killing left-wing Peronists, and also supported violence against far-left Peronists. So the Montoneros were forced to move underground. A communist group called the People's Revolutionary Army, or ERP, was gaining power and was finally maintaining the AAA. Perón himself was not the healthiest, being in the mid-70s, and his health was steadily declining, leading to his wife and Vice President Isabel Perón often had to act president in his stead. His failing health soon led to his death, and Isabel taking on the rest of his term. She became the first female president in the world, depending on the account, since she was not elected. She was even more against the left than Perón had been, and the power of the AAA increased. This created even more divisions between the left and right, and thus more fighting. This was mainly because of the high position of the AAA's leader, and he had much control over the country's politics. But his policies were unstable, and in the end, Isabel realized this. But it was already too late. The country was too divided, and it already declared war on the leftist group ERP and Montoneros by attacking them previously in Tucumán province. And because of the growing instability, a coup took place and another military dictatorship power in the country. The new government quickly removed labor unions and banned all political parties. It drew these new laws through by imprisoning, torturing, and killing ERP and Montonero members, which started what is called the Dirty War. They started forming detention camps where these acts were to happen. This soon expanded not only to the far left but also other opposition or critics, creating a regime where no one could say anything about the government in fear of being arrested or killed. When the government captured pregnant women, they would often let her live until the child was born and then kill her and adopt the child. A normal way of killing the victims were to these so-called death planes. They were to drag people, strip them naked and throw them into the ocean, drown off of planes. After only 3 years of dictatorial rule, estimates of around 30,000 people being killed by the government were very probable. The dictator and main operator of the Dirty War soon resigned, but it continued, although to a lesser extent, with his successors. After a few more military dictators, over the next year, Leopoldo Galtieri became dictator, and needed to win the people's support and wanted to conquer some place and must have thought himself, this huge empire over the last 30 years lost most of its territory, so they would not care if I took this barely populated island from them outside of our coast. Besides that, they also have diminished their military as they don't have all those colonies anymore. And so Argentina invaded British Falklands and St. George Island. They did not face much British resistance as they took the island, as the British had almost no troops defending the islands, so they took it fairly easy and won the war. Or at least that was what the plan was. But apparently the Brits did care and sent their navy and military to retake the island. The Brits landed men on the island, but Argentina had huge air superiority, so they could not bring many ships into the area and it was too far to bring planes. Eventually they got more men on the island, but they were still outnumbered. At the same time, Brits had also reconquered St. George Island, even though they were outnumbered, sent their troops to Falklands capital and a smaller group to the south to capture a military settlement. Even though they were fewer, they were much better trained and most likely had better morale than the Argentinian conscripts fighting for a military dictatorship that no one liked. So then, the Brits defeated Argentina, who surrendered, ending the war. This was the last thing the dictator could handle, with huge backlash, so he resigned. Another dictator was put in power. He called for election to please the people, since they did not have any control over the country anymore. So election was held, and the radicals won with a slight majority, bringing back democracy into the nations. But Argentina's problem was far from over. With a bad economy, with over 400% inflation, the radicals started by freeing opposition, put in jail by the military government, and putting the military government trial. But it was still against some of the more extreme leftists, keeping Montenero's member in jail. They also tried to improve relations with Chile after a dispute in Patagonia by the military government by signing the Treaty of Peace and Friendship with them. The inflation became even worse, so they created a new currency, tried to stop it. They also decreased their budget, mainly cutting military spending. These economic measures helped in the beginning, but inflation soon started to rise again. This also made them lose power in the Senate, losing the majority in the next legislative election, having a much harder time implementing their new policies. Some of the military, not happy with losing so much power, rose up in rebellion, but they were soon crushed. In the next election though, the radical lost and the Justicalist won. This Justicalist was more in favor in capitalist than previous Peronist and introduced more free trade and companies, but the economy was still in a very bad shape. This was until a new economy minister was put in place and another new currency was put in place, along with other measures mostly stabilized the economy. He also made it possible for presidents to have 2 consecutive terms and made them 1 year shorter into 4 years instead of 5. With this in place, the same president was elected again, but in his second term, the economy once again took a turn for the worse and unemployment was high in the country. Even though successful measures to help this were enacted, it was still very high. This started what is sometimes called the Argentine Great Depression of 1998 to 2002. Over 50% of Argentinians were poor and half of them impoverished. This led to the country wanting to change the government, so in the end of the Justicalist term, in 1999, the radicals took power again. They tried to improve the situation by raising taxes and cutting government employees' wages, but these measures were not enough, and after a large protest, the president resigned. After a large economic crash in 2002, the country started to recover economically. A new election was held, and the Justicalists put forth 2 leaders, one of them being the previous president in the 90s, Carlos Menem, but he resigned from the runoff election, so the other Justicalist candidate won. The term started with economic growth again, but it started to stagnate near the end. He did not run for president again, but instead supported his wife, who won the election, so she became the first elected female president of Argentina. She made export taxes higher on grain, tried to make more farmers sell it domestically, reduced prices, but this was met with 2 strikes from farmer unions, creating the opposite effect, reducing food in the country. But in the end, the strike ended. After this setback, she lost popularity and seats in the Senate and Congress. The next election was soon to be held, so they had to do something to win again. Thanks to the bettering economic situation, they created many popular social reforms to please the populace. This included same-sex marriage, which made Argentina the first country in Latin America and the second in whole of America after Canada and some US states to allow this. For the next election, her husband was supposed to run for president again, but he died before he had a chance. So Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, as was her name, ran again and won. Inflation was on the rise again, and the debt, as it been during previous financial crises, was high. Both of these were not high enough to cause another financial crisis. She was not allowed to run for president again in 2015, and a coalition, including the Radicals and Republican proposal, among other smaller parties, won. They moved taxes on many exports, among other new policies. Inflation is still high. Now it's only up to the future to see where Argentina will go next. And also, next time I will cover Armenia. See you then!